Hey friends, welcome back to Nikki T Live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Mark Erikson. Mark, how you doing today?
Hi, doing pretty good.
Cool, cool, awesome. I think at least in my Twitter bubble, probably most people know who you are, but for folks that might not know who you are, would you mind just giving a little bit of a background of who you are, the man, the myth, the legend, potentially, I guess?
I've joked a few times that I'm internet famous amongst a very specific group of people. I'm
Yeah,
Mark Erikson. In my day job, I work at Replay.io, where we're building a time traveling debugger for JavaScript. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to chat about that later.
yeah.
And outside of my day job, I've been maintaining the Redux libraries since 2016, which takes up an awful lot of my time. It is basically an entire unpaid second job.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, we're obviously gonna dig into Redux as well, and I'm excited to talk about Replay as well, where you're working at now.
Mhm,
But I know you first came on my radar when I started using Redux professionally at a place I was working at in 2017, and we used it quite a bit. And I remember back in the day, like I say old in React days, but like we were
mhm,
discussing a little bit before the stream. So I've been I started dabbling with React in about 2015, and even I was doing TypeScript back then, which is wild to think about because
mhm,
I was at a Microsoft shop, so they were basically go TypeScript all the way. And I was using VS Code at the time, and it was the only editor that supported TypeScript, and there was no
mhm.
extensions. It was literally just kind of like Notepad with types. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, we started using Redux where I was working at one place, and it seemed to be like during that time in React line, at least, it seemed to be like the de facto way to do state management. And we were also talking about this briefly too before the stream, but I think at least initially, like a lot of people thought Redux was part of React or it was only for React. And I guess I don't know if you want to maybe talk a
Mhm.
bit about like that whole spiel, I guess.
I can do the history lesson in my sleep. So,
Okay, perfect.
so timeline. React was announced in 2013. A year later, Facebook came back and they said, we've been using React internally for a few years. We've also been using our, some various state management approaches, kind of like probably similar to Backbone. I don't know if they were actually using Backbone or just had their own similar tools at the time, but they
Yeah.
had issues keeping different pieces of state in sync across the entire application. The classic
Yeah.
example was the notifications counter in the toolbar doesn't update properly when
Okay. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
when you click on a message somewhere in the page. And so they said we've come up with this pattern that we call the flux architecture, where we centralize the process of updating the state, and anytime the rest of the UI wants to do something, it has to send this action object to the central thing called a dispatcher, and then there's a bunch of these store objects. And the
Hmm.
idea was like it just makes it more obvious where things are actually going to get updated in the application, and that prevents like this whole series of events from ricocheting around the app. So at least you have a
Yeah.
better mental model of what's going to happen when you click a button. And the
Yeah.
problem
Totally.
was they didn't actually publish a specific library for this pattern. They published a couple of
Yeah.
utilities. So for the next year, the React community started building dozens of their own Flux libraries, most of them with really bad names that were jokes about Back to the Future.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are probably like 50 or 60 of these different Flux libraries, each with their own variations on the pattern.
Yeah.
So mid 2015, Dan Abramov wanted to do a conference talk about time travel debugging. Problem was he didn't even have a library that did this yet. Like he had the idea in his head for what it would feel
Hmm.
like, but it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So Redux actually started basically as a conference talk demo. Like he was building a real library, but it was
Yeah.
basically built to demonstrate this idea at the conference talk. And it applied some functional programming principles to the Flux architecture. figured out that we can use reducer functions to manage a state update instead of having these store instances actually
Mhm.
keep track of the data. And eventually, a number of people in the React community saw Redux, felt it was the best Flux library out there, and began to adopt it.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth noting that there were a lot of issues with, like, there were some specific issues with React at the time, as well
Mhm.
as the mindset in the community. I am a very big believer in looking at tools in the context and the time that they were created, and
Yeah.
understanding what problem was this tool created to solve, what were its influences, what was the mindset at the time. And
Mhm.
so the mindset was, we are dealing with state management on the client side.
Yeah.
We probably need to deal with side effects in some way. And we've just had an entire year of the React ecosystem building these Flux libraries. And there's still, like, most apps out there are still using Angular 1 or Backbone or something
Yeah.
similar. So that's the time frame and the scenario that Redux came into. So
Yeah.
Redux has always been UI agnostic. It's plain JavaScript. You can use it with any UI framework. Basically, anything that can run a JavaScript interpreter can run Redux.
Yeah.
But it was always designed from day one to work well with React.
Mhm.
It was created by somebody who was in the React community as a Flux architecture library, which the React community was all about. And so it quickly ended up getting tied with React conceptually. So
Yeah.
yeah, by mid 2016, the early adopters had converged on Redux as the best Flux library out there. It basically killed off all the other Flux libraries. And then it became a situation where people began to assume, if you're using React, you
Mhm.
must also be using Redux as well.
Yeah.
And that also led to a problem where people were shoving Redux in places it really never should have been put in the first place. It was the over enthusiastic early adoption
Yeah.
portion of the S curve.
I definitely remember that Redux form, like, every
Hmm.
time you typed, it would, like, it yeah, I there's, like, a lot of things that, yeah, you shouldn't be using it for, but, like, I think Eric, his last name's escaping me at the moment, but
Eric
he realized.
Rasmussen.
Yeah, thank you. Like, he definitely, I think, mentioned after, like, yeah, this wasn't a good idea, but I know he has, what is it, Final Form now is the one that he
Yes.
has
Mhm.
these days? Yeah. Yeah, so, like, yeah, there was definitely, yeah, it was interesting times because, yeah, like, I remember too, and, like, the thing with React, like, was they were always saying, like, everything's got to be mutable, which is, been something pretty consistent in the React ecosystem, and Redux played really well with that,
Mhm.
and with the reducer pattern and stuff. And I I remember, some things I remember about it were, I always got confused with the higher order component that added the props to it.
Mhm.
I don't know if others, that when you were maintaining that prior version, like, I always found it hard to find where are these props coming from. Like, I knew Redux was wiring them up, but like, sometimes I just had to search through files, and then I finally found the high order component.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was a relatively common complaint,
Okay.
and one of the pain points that people experienced with higher order components in general, and the React Redux Connect API specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, Andrew Clark, one of the co-creators of Redux, who, like Dan, eventually joined the React team at Facebook, and it still works on the core of React today.
Yeah.
Actually had a library called Recompose, which
Oh yeah,
attempted to
that's right.
do kind of like functionally oriented higher order components. So you just keep making more and more wrapper components that have like one specialized purpose,
Yeah.
and then you combine them together, and eventually your actual component gets props from 5, 6, 10 different wrapper components, each of which
Yeah.
was passing down like one piece of information.
Yeah, it just yeah, it became confusing sometimes, but like I'm trying to remember the recompose. Is that what used reselect as well, or was reselect something separate? I can't remember. It's
Reselect is separate. So
yeah, okay,
reselect is a function memoization library. So if you call a function multiple times and you pass in the same arguments, it only is going to do the calculation once.
yeah,
And this is useful for performance reasons, avoiding, recalculating potentially expensive data, as well as consistently returning the same references if the
hmm
inputs haven't changed, which, as you
yeah,
said, since both React and Redux rely on immutability, you want to keep the same references to avoid accidental re-renders if you don't need them.
yeah. No, totally. I kind of wonder if that prior art is what inspired the use memo hook, I mean, it's not
Very,
necessarily tied to React, obviously, or Redux, but uh,
very likely related. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, and like I mentioned before the stream, I haven't used Redux since 2018, and I know a lot has changed, and we're definitely going to get into that. Um, and there was a lot of things that, well, and probably still do, that Redux gives you. Is one of the things that was really great about it was you had the Redux dev tools, which
Mhm.
still exist today. I imagine probably in
Yep.
a slightly different form, but this was super helpful for a lot of things. Like one, just tracing the actions you were sending. You could see like what was actually going on. And this kind of ties into time travel debugging, which is
Mhm.
also related to replay, which we'll get into
Yep.
after. But
Yep.
but like it was honestly such a great addition. I can't remember the name of the author who created Redux Dev Tools, because it wasn't a core maintainer. I don't believe it. It was a
Well,
separate
so
project.
Dan created the initial version of the Redux Dev Tools as part of his initial
Okay.
demo, and the original version of it was actually a piece that you built directly into your app, both the processing
Okay.
logic and the UI. See, there was a component you had to render in your app to get the Dev Tools panel, and
Okay. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
someone else from the ecosystem named Mihail Deardev later took that and extracted it, split it up into just the store logic piece, and then he's the one who built out the browser extension that we have today.
Okay. Yeah.
And he
Okay. Okay.
worked
Yeah.
on it for a number of years, and then he got busy and kind of disappeared. And we, the existing, the other Redux maintainers, were able to get control of the actual, like the extensions on for Chrome and Firefox and the
Okay.
packages. And so that's now maintained by a guy named Nathan Birama.
Oh, okay. Cool. Nice. Yeah. The other thing that was really great about those tools is you could also generate unit tests from them. And because like what
Mm,
one thing, and we'll get into modern Redux, because I know a lot has changed even though I haven't used it. But like one thing, like I liked Redux because it was consistent. Like the patterns to do things
mhm,
were consistent. There was, I found at the time, a lot of boilerplate, but like I knew what was going on when I saw an action, or when you
mhm,
dispatch, like it was very obvious what was going on. And it was a lot of boilerplate, like I said, but I kind of want to bring it to modern Redux now. So like there was a lot of things, like when you would create an action and the types. And I guess there's other things that have changed over the years too, because like TypeScript is obviously pretty
mhm.
popular these days, and I remember using it back in 2018 with Redux, and for
And it was a
obvious
pain.
reasons.
It was a
Yeah,
pain.
yeah, like for obvious reasons, like types, because the other thing is TypeScript is improved immensely. Like I remember when I started using TypeScript, like there was no infer keyword. You had to explicitly type things all the time. So a lot has changed there too. And I guess this kind of brings a bunch of things in. Like, so Redux is more
Mhm,
modern now. I definitely want to talk about that. I'm curious about the code base. Is it written in TypeScript now, or using JS doc, or
mhm.
what are y'all using over there now?
Yep. Okay, so more history. So I myself actually started learning React about the same time you did, mid 2015. Purely
Okay.
coincidentally, it was the same time that Redux was actually being invented.
Okay.
I spent the second half of 2015 working in chat channels and just trying to read and learn.
Mhm.
Got to the point where I saw questions and I could answer them. Got very involved in answering questions, even though I technically didn't even write any React or Redux code until like December 2015. Um,
Yeah.
and then at the start of 2016, I volunteered to write an FAQ page for the Redux docs. I was seeing the same questions being asked everywhere. So I did that, filed the PR to add the FAQ page. Dan
Okay.
merged it, gave me commit rights. And for the next few months, I felt like I really only had permission to, help triage issues and maybe do some more documentation.
Okay.
Dan had actually joined Facebook to work on React back in November 2015, right
Mhm.
after he released Redux 1.0. And so by
Yeah.
mid 2016, he was very, very busy working on the React team. And Dan's handed off a few other projects over the years.
Yeah.
And so he pinged myself and a guy named Tim Dorr and said, I'm busy with React. Here's the keys to Redux. Have fun.
Yeah.
And it actually took me a few more months until I actually felt like I had the authority or the right to say this is how it's supposed to work or how to be used. I
Mhm.
can remember a couple issues in particular where someone had a proposal or an idea, and I actually had to go through the code, really understand what it's doing, have an opinion on what it should do, and actually feel confident enough to say, well, I guess I'm the maintainer. This is what I think we should or shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And so things kind of took off from there.
Okay.
So in terms of like that historical usage arc, so by that time, mid 2016, Redux
Mhm.
was getting pretty wide adoption. People were starting to use it with React everywhere. And there were multiple reasons for this. One was, again, the emphasis on client-side state management. It's the best Flux library. Let's use that. But there was also the prop passing problem.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Prop drilling has always been a pain point in React,
Yeah.
and React has had a context API since like 2014, but
Mhm.
the old legacy context API was actually very broken.
Okay.
You could put values in there, but if you tried to update a value and pass it down into the tree, it could get blocked if any component in between used the should component update method and canceled
Oh,
its
yeah.
update. And
Okay. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
and like lots and lots of components did this, including React Redux's Connect API.
Yeah.
And so you fundamentally could not rely on context to pass down updated values, but you
Mhm.
could use it to put some kind of an event emitter into context and
Yeah.
have child components subscribe to that event emitter. And that's basically what a Redux store is. So a
Yeah.
lot of people chose to use Redux because it lets me deeply pass data around in the
Mhm.
component tree. Um, as well as like everyone's using Redux. Of course I should be using Redux.
Yeah, yeah.
And as we got into 2017, 2018, there were like two or three different shifts in the ecosystem. One was that the mindset of the community started to shift from the problem statement being around client side state management to being
Mhm.
around data fetching and caching. Now,
Yeah.
it's ironic because if you look at the history of Redux, there were all these side effects libraries coming out for the first couple of years. What we ended
Yeah.
up with was thunks and sagas and observables and a handful of other weird
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Turns out that like 90 to 95% of your side effects in a client side application are actually just data fetching.
Mhm.
And the problem was people were using things like sagas and observables to manage their data fetching. And on the one
Yeah.
hand, this might result in, technically a more like architecturally pure, functionally oriented kind of a code base. But in practice,
Yeah.
they were writing tons and tons of additional code just to
Yeah.
trigger an Ajax request and process the data. So
Yeah.
that was a pain. Um,
Yeah.
you also had to write lots and lots of logic to dispatch actions before and after the request, and the reducer logic to cache the data. And then
Mhm.
you get into the rest of the boilerplate problems that were true. Like you can, even before Redux Toolkit, you could use patterns that were somewhat simpler,
Yeah.
but but the docs showed patterns that were somewhat verbose for good
Mhm.
historical reasons, and people just adopted these without even questioning, well, why are the docs showing that at all?
Yeah.
And the classic example is splitting your code across at least 3 separate files. So you've got
Mhm.
actions slash todos.js, reducers slash todos.js. You've got the type string constant, export const add underscore to
Yeah,
do equals
yeah.
quote add underscore to do, because you're using the same string in both places and you don't want to like mistype it.
Yeah.
And maybe you've even got like selectors slash todos.js.
Yeah.
Redux as a library did not require that folder structure, but
Mhm.
it was shown in the documentation and most people adopted that. And
Yeah.
then you add
I remember.
in mm,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
like and then you add in things like immutable updates are hard because JavaScript is mutable by default. So you've
Yeah.
got lots and lots of nested object spreads and array
Mhm.
maps and all this other stuff. Um, the the Connect API has some variations in how you can pass in the various parameters.
Mhm.
For example, you can pass in for the map dispatch argument, where you set up action creators to come in as props.
Yeah.
You could always pass those in as an object, and it would wrap them automatically. But a lot of people pass them in as a function, which means more lines of code to
Yeah.
just wrap this action creator and return all the values. So, like, there were a lot of things you could do to make some of that code shorter, but a lot
Mhm.
of people didn't realize that you had freedom of choice, and they just ended up writing things that were very, very verbose on top of the verbosity that was kind of like necessary at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah,
And then
totally,
you
yeah.
add in TypeScript, like you said, and
Yeah.
a lot of people are very, very insistent on like, I want to have absolute perfect type safety. And so then
Yeah.
in addition to defining, your action type string and your action creator function, they're writing a separate type for the type of the action object, and then
Mhm.
unioning them together into all the possible actions that can be dispatched. And like, I
Yeah.
understand all the reasons why we ended up there, but frankly, it was a royal pain for people to deal with. And so
Mhm.
it's not a surprise that people began to complain about it. Plus, with any technology, after like a couple years after it comes out, people start accumulating all the pain points and the shininess
Yeah,
wears
yeah.
off. And that's where we hit Redux in 2017.
Yeah.
So
No, that's okay, yeah. Yeah, I remember, yeah, like I said, I had a lot of boilerplate, but we would always have action creators to reduce some of that boilerplate. But there was still, it still seemed like a lot, but getting one of the things that probably still holds true today, I imagine, is Redux was very testable. Like you could just say like this is like obviously it's not the same thing as running end-to-end tests. I'm speaking about unit tests here, but like you could reliably write some good tests there. And the Redux dev tools, like I said, also help
Mhm.
generate some of those. I never honestly ended up using the generated tests. I tend to write them by hand, and maybe not so much
Mhm.
now if I were using Copilot, um, but I think that and like you're saying about TypeScript, the funny thing about TypeScript is like people are used to it nowadays, but like when TypeScript started, like even in 2015 it wasn't that popular when I started using it, but like
Mhm.
there was the Definitely Type project, which I think had just started or maybe had been around for a year or two. And the funny thing is like with all these libraries, including I think Redux probably had to do this too, but you would get these nice typed APIs, but if you looked at the actual types, it was like any, like if you looked at Lodash, it was
Yes.
like any
Mhm.
any any everywhere, and which
Mhm.
cracked me up. But like the nice thing is TypeScript's gotten to a place where that can be cleaned up now, but you can still surface like the APIs you were expecting, like in terms of
Mhm.
type. So a lot has changed there too. But yeah, so I guess in terms of like it's called React Toolkit nowadays, right? Or is that it's your
Redux
Redux?
Toolkit. Yeah.
Sorry, Redux. Got
So,
it. Not React.
yep.
See.
So what happened was by mid 2018, we were consistently people, switching over to React query and saying like, I deleted 5,000 lines of Redux code. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
probably accurate because you'd had to write all that code just to manage your data fetching. And the word boilerplate appeared in every conversation about Redux.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I filed some discussion issues about like how can we make Redux easier to use. I've got a whole blog post that goes through the lengthy story of how we ended up where we did. But
Hmm.
the end result is that in late 2019 we shipped Redux Toolkit 1.0. And the idea
Okay.
is the original Redux core library basically did almost nothing for you.
Okay. Yeah.
There was the create store method and the combine reducers method, and that's it. Like you're writing all your own reducer code. How you structure the logic or fill in any of the pieces after that is entirely up for
Yeah.
you. And there's always like even just setting up a store usually took 20 to 30 lines of dancing around setting up the middleware and bringing in the dev tools and all this other stuff.
Hmm.
And it's like, what if we built a package that wraps around the original Redux core and it has all the good default behavior built in? And
Yeah.
Create React App was actually a big inspiration in that respect.
Okay.
Like React tutorials in 2015 always started with, we're going to spend the first half of the tutorial explaining how to configure Webpack and Babel before you write your first line of React code.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so Create React App abstracted Webpack and Babel and Jest and ESLint so that you don't worry about it. You just run Create React App my app, and it gives you a good default setup out of the box. And so
Yeah.
Redux Toolkit is that exact same thing. It's built out of smaller pieces that always existed in Redux apps. It
Okay.
it gives you APIs that do the right thing with less code, and
Hmm.
it's the same patterns that have always existed with Redux. We've just built in as much of that as possible for you.
Okay.
So like you can set up a store with one function call and it will automatically combine the reducers, add the right middleware, and turn on the Redux DevTools. You
Okay.
can set up a slice reducer. You just write the reducer functions. You can mutate the state inside, but it still becomes an
Okay.
immutable update. You get the action creator functions for free, properly
Hmm.
typed. You don't even think about writing action type strings anymore.
Okay.
And it all just works for you. We've
Okay.
got we've got other methods built in for things like the standard thunk pattern of I make an async request and I'm going
Hmm.
to dispatch an action before and a success or failure action afterwards. We've got a util for managing normalized entities in the state, so looking them up by ID instead of array index. Um,
Okay.
we have a middleware that manages triggering side effects when certain actions get dispatched,
Okay.
and it's kind of like sagas, but a lot simpler. And
Okay.
we now have RTK query, which is its own entire data fetching and caching layer, similar
Okay.
to React Query or Apollo, but it's built out of all the pieces already in Redux Toolkit. So
Okay.
it uses thunks and slice reducers and middleware, standard Redux pieces,
Okay.
but the public API, and you end up with your use get Pokemon query hook that
Okay.
automatically does the fetching and re-renders the component for you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. No, that's really nice. And I guess this is because, like you were saying, like obviously, like people like to try new shiny things and they move on to other things. But when you're working on like a production grade app, like I worked at Autodesk at one point, and they were on a forked version of Ruby on Rails 1 for a while.
Mhm.
We were using Sencha, which is like a front end library
Oh, yeah.
that's yeah, and it was like version 1 and it had been forked and tweaked and there was all these weird things and we were trying to bring in React because they'd started using React elsewhere, which is a whole other story. But like my main point is like when you're working somewhere like you know they're gonna have a stack. Like if somebody created a React project in the 2015s to
Mhm.
2020s, it's probably got Redux in it. So
Yep.
and unless there's like a real business case to say pull this out for something else, which like it's probably good at what it's doing already. So it's nice that we have these modern patterns now, and especially like I imagine like obviously there's been learnings with the library getting feedback from the community, but
Mhm.
like other libraries too, like I imagine you've been inspired by other ones like RTK query, like you said, that's heavily inspired from React query, I imagine. It's not,
Mhm.
you know, but it's nice because you're still in that Redux ecosystem, which a lot of people probably are. So
Mhm.
it's pretty neat that that's all there. And so in terms of, because I haven't, funnily enough, I've never actually used React Query because I was like, my previous job I was at Netlify, so I was working on the frameworks team. It was more about making sure things deployed properly. And then prior to that, I was at Dev 2, but I was using Preact with like in a bespoke manner. So like we didn't have
Mhm.
state management. It was basically we had a Rails backend, and so like I was using data attributes a lot to handle state management, air quotes, in certain
Mhm.
scenarios. But um, I had a point to this. Yeah, I guess like in term like nowadays, like in terms of like the migration path, like if I had an app, like let's say like theoretically, like I haven't touched my 2018 app and I
Mhm.
come to modern Redux right now, like what's the migration path there look like? Is it a like a rewrite? Is there code mods
Funny,
or is it
funny,
just
funny you should mention that. So actually, if you want to pull up the screen share here for a minute,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
the great thing about RTK is it is still Redux. It is still a single Redux store, dispatching actions, immutable updates and reducers. Um,
Okay,
and it is 100% compatible behavior wise with all your existing Redux code. You can
okay,
mix and match and pick one file at a time and modernize things, and it's all still Redux. It all still works together.
okay,
So we've actually got a docs page in both the Redux core documentation site and the Redux Toolkit documentation site called Migrating to Modern Redux. And this
okay,
goes
yeah,
through and says for each kind of logic in your application, here's how you would go about migrating that to RTK.
okay,
And like for example, you could switch your store setup from the legacy Redux create store method to configure store, and you can do that, and you can swap it out from this stuff up here where you're manually
okay,
combining the reducers and applying the middleware and composing the dev tools and calling create store. You can swap it down to this one function call, which actually does more work and better without
okay.
touching any other file in your application. It's still a
Oh,
Redux
okay,
store. Nothing else has to change. It all still works together. Or if you're working on, a reducer. So
hmm,
typically you've got your action type strings and your action creators and your reducer, which has some object spreads and some array maps. And
yeah,
you can switch that to Redux Toolkit's create slice, and you can switch just this one reducer file, and all the other reducers are still going to continue working exactly the same way.
okay.
And you just migrate them over time as you have time and the ability to do it.
Okay. That's really nice that there's like an incremental migration path instead of just YOLO got to do it all right now. So that's really nice. Um, I guess a question I have about modern Redux 2 is like I said, like obviously there's a lot more libraries that have come out since
Mhm.
Redux. there's like Zustan, there was
Mhm.
there's a ton of them. There was what's the one from Michael Westrate that uses proxies?
MobX.
MobX, yeah, thank
Well,
you.
well,
Yeah.
MobX is and came out actually. Ironically, MobX actually started development like a week or two before Redux did.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it's always used. It used classes for a long time. I think the
Yeah.
current version is more about taking plain JS data and making it observable. But
Okay.
it's always taken the idea that rather than like you dispatch an action, you've got plain data and
Hmm.
you write code that mutates it, and other parts of the UI that care about it have subscribed directly to updates on like that one field, and everything auto magically propagates. Whereas Redux has always taken the idea that we're going to be a little more explicit about things. You don't
Yeah.
just randomly modify a field anywhere in the code base. The
Hmm.
updates are always done in the reducers. The reducers are always triggered by dispatching an action. And then any piece of the UI that cares about this is going to have a selector that looks at the latest state and pulls it out, and then
Yeah.
it'll re-render if it changed. So the
Okay.
results are the same, but the mindset of how do we get to that point is
Hmm.
somewhat architecturally different.
Yeah, no, totally. And that I remember what I was thinking about. Like, there is MobX, but Michael also created
Immer,
Immer.js,
and
and yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
we use Immer in Redux Toolkit. The very first
Okay.
prototype that I built of Redux Toolkit had Immer built in. And frankly,
Okay.
Immer is like the single best way to write immutable updates in the JavaScript ecosystem. In
Hmm.
fact, if I go to the Immer docs, I am actually literally quoted at the start of the Immer docs saying how much I love it and how life changing it is.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's pretty neat, and like I haven't used it in a project, but I'm pretty sure I understand how it works. I just want to explain how I think it works and
Mhm.
just fill in the holes if I'm
Sure.
missing it. So essentially, you're still dealing with immutable data,
Mhm.
but it uses JavaScript proxies, which are they used to be polyfilled, but they're pretty much widely available now. So you
Mhm.
kind of get like this proxy of the original object, and you change only what you need to, and then that somehow creates a brand new object, but it doesn't have to copy everything. Is that correct?
Basically, yeah. Like the proxy allows Immer to track every time you access or update a field.
Okay.
And so you like what you're given is this draft, the proxy wrapper that
Yeah.
looks and feels like it's your original piece of data, but you can write this mutating code inside of a
Hmm.
callback. It's this is probably not 100% technically accurate, but the way you can think about is it is tracking all the updates you make to the proxy in the
Okay.
callback. And then when the callback is done, it's basically going to replay those as proper immutable updates of the original
Okay.
value.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the
Yeah. Cool.
result is the same as if you'd written all the object spreads and array maps by hand, but the syntax for doing that looks like you're mutating the data.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That was it. That was the nice thing about it. It looks like you're mutating, but it's not. And I totally feel that pain about spreading objects. I just remember all the time, and you'd be like, okay, gonna pass this in. Oh man, now I gotta spread that, and I gotta spread this, and then I'll remember as my code base, it almost looked like a Christmas tree with dot dot dots and like
Yep. Yep.
squigglies everywhere. So that's cool that okay, that's cool that it's actually in Redux Toolkit or in
Mm.
Redux Toolkit now. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so I guess this is like I guess a general question, and I've definitely benefited in my career from using Redux, but I'm curious. This kind of open-ended question, but like, what would you say to somebody today? Like, I'm starting a new React project. w-
Mhm.
Uh, how would you, I guess, convince isn't the word, but like, why would somebody use Redux today? And I don't mean that as a knock. I
Mhm.
definitely
No, no,
appreciate how the
that's
work
that's
and
that's a totally fair question. And there's actually some irony to it. Like we Redux maintainers have actually spent practically no time at all trying to convince people they should use Redux. In fact, over the years, we've
okay.
spent most of our time telling people you shouldn't be using Redux here. This is not a good fit. Um,
Yeah.
and on top of that, like because I understand all the like the different tools and libraries out there, I
Hmm.
I can make good arguments about the trade-offs of, Ember, Angular, Vue, Zoostand, React Query, Jotai, etc., even though I've never
Yeah.
had a chance to use them myself.
Hmm.
So like I'm actually in a unfortunate position where I'm like almost too reasonable to sales pitch my own library. Um Having said that, one of the conference talk proposals I came up for this year, I've actually been convinced to try to do a talk on why you should use Redux in 2024. And
Yeah.
like I I'm still need to get that one accepted. I've got a couple possibilities that I might be able to do it at. But
Okay.
honestly, the problem there again is like it's going to be hard for me to sit there and actually make the positive case for Redux, not because there are no positives, but because
Hmm.
my natural tendency is to try to give like the balance, like there are pros and cons, and like other libraries are good too. Like it's
Yeah.
hard for me to sit here and just like I'm only going to talk about the good things. It's kind of a thing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, um, let me see if I can actually give kind of like a miniature version of that right now.
Okay.
Redux is clearly not the only state management tool. Redux
Hmm.
has a lot of trade offs. Redux is not the best fit for many cases, but there are a lot of valid reasons to choose Redux today. Some of them
Okay.
are, kind of like I've seen React compared to the, no one got fired for buying from IBM case. Like it's the big choice, it's the default choice, it's the
Yeah.
safe
Yeah.
choice. There is a little bit of that, and this is not a particularly compelling technical reason, but it is a valid reason to consider using Redux. Redux
Hmm.
is still by downloads and other metrics that I've looked at the most widely used client side state management library for React apps even today.
Yeah.
The percentage of React apps that use Redux has continued to drop over the years because React keeps growing and there's other
Hmm.
choices in the ecosystem. My own estimates are it's it's down to maybe like 33% of React apps today, whereas it
Okay.
used to be like well above 50%. But that's still a very large percentage.
Yeah. It's a huge chunk still. Yeah.
Redux is incredibly well documented. And that's a little bit of a boast because I've written a large percentage of those docs, but it is well documented, more thoroughly
Hmm.
documented than many other libraries that I've seen. There are tons of examples of how to use it. It is well
Yeah.
known. It is very mature. The trade-offs and the performance behaviors and the patterns are extremely well known. Um,
Hmm.
and especially now with Redux Toolkit, the usage patterns are more consistent.
Yeah.
Prior to Redux Toolkit, everybody had their own little Redux add-on libraries, and Redux code bases often looked very different. And
Yeah.
Redux Toolkit has made those usage patterns a lot more consistent. So,
Okay.
while it's not the most compelling argument, the fact that it is consistent and documented and mature and stable is a big deal.
Yeah.
Another is that it does promote good architectural patterns. And frankly, I've always preferred this argument like more than the skip prop drilling and passing data around argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, David Khorshid, the author of X State, has
Hmm.
done a number of tweets and talks where he talks about um, event based state management architectures do actually scale better in terms of code base size and maintainability
Yeah.
than patterns where you are directly mutating data in a component. That's not to say that like signals or libraries like Jotai or whatever are wrong,
Yeah.
there is a lot of convenience and simplicity that comes with that.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is that now, like, any random part of your code base could be applying an update to a piece of data,
Yeah.
which can make it harder to track down or figure out how the pieces go together. Having a single store and centralizing the logic in reducers means that the UI is often simpler because a button's just
Mhm.
going to say, like, dispatch to do added, and it's not going to worry about doing the updates or keeping things in sync. It's just, this thing happened, I'll let the store deal with it.
Yeah.
Um, having a central store does also reduce flexibility sometimes. Like, sometimes having your data spread across multiple stores or atoms may be nicer.
Mhm.
Again, it's that trade-off, no silver bullet aspect. But there are
Yeah.
valid points to Redux's patterns give you a good, consistent architecture and help you understand where the logic lives in a code base. Like, if
Yeah.
I open up a new React Redux app that I've never seen before, the very first thing I do is I go straight to the reducers, because that tells me what state exists, what
Mhm.
actions can happen in the app, and how the state gets updated in response. There's
Yeah.
also the fact that, like you alluded to earlier with testing, the more of your code base that you can write as pure functions, just arguments in, result out,
Yeah.
the easier it is to understand that code. There's less mental overhead.
Totally.
And every app is going to have side effects, whether it's data fetching or we did this thing and something else has to happen. But just, if you can increase the percentage of the logic that is simple and straightforward and just calculate this result, it's
Yeah.
less of your app that you have to spend time worrying about how the pieces fit together. And
Yeah.
finally,
No,
there
totally.
are the some of the technical aspects. The fact that the Redux dev tools do exist, and they give you that readable view of, here's what happened in the app. There's the fact that you can use middleware for more advanced behavior, manipulating the
Mhm.
actions or logging them or whatever. Um, and then there's the fact that we have things like RTK query to abstract the data fetching process. And at that point, you're not even thinking about, like, reducers or actions or dispatching. You're just saying, here's my endpoint definition. Here's the API request that we make to fetch to dos or update a to do.
Yeah.
And now I just call the hook in my component and it just works.
Yeah. And I like what you said about because well, this is a nice thing about React too is you have the one-way data flow. So it's happened to me so many times where I've just been like, why is the UI not rendering properly? And then it sometimes it takes a minute for me to remember, oh yeah, well, it's definitely the data because that's
Mhm.
just how React works. So knowing, like you said, the consistency of like, okay, I just fired a to-do action, so there's a new to-do. That's why the UI rendered this, like it's the path to like, oh, what's happening is potentially quicker.
Mhm.
Um, and it's kind of funny because you were leading to signals. I've only used like signals briefly in like a couple like just like examples I was working on, but I remember like prior to Redux, like there was like, and my old coworker Ryan Carnetto talks about this
Mhm.
Steve Sanderson from Microsoft with uh the name's escaping me of the library. I used it
Knockout.
briefly. Knockout, thank you. Yeah, Knockout JS, and it was cool because you had computed values and all this stuff. But to your point about there's trade-offs because like you can start changing things anywhere, and
Mhm.
then all of a sudden you're questioning like, why did this computed value just change? Like where is that coming from? Because like
Mhm.
it could literally be from anywhere now. And but at the same time, I was thinking about this the other day in terms of signals. Like I'm working on a feature right now at work, and I just kind of have this wizard component, and as you go to the next step, it renders a different step. But I had some props that I was feeding in from like the page basically that passed into my wizard component, and then when I did something, to say go get me the new thing, the prop that was coming from the actual page caused the whole wizard to reload because obviously it's getting new
Mhm.
data it's causing a full re-render. And that was the first time where I thought like I fixed the issue, but like I was like, that's somewhere where like if it was a signal, it wouldn't have actually re-rendered my whole thing, you know, it would have just been like,
Mhm.
okay, here's the latest thing. And anyways, that's a little side note, but just because you mentioned signals. But it's yeah, I think like you were saying, the consistency and stuff, like I actually really appreciate that you're not necessarily like saying Redux is the best, everybody has to use it
Oh, I mean,
because
it's never been the case.
yeah. No, but I think that's refreshing because, you know, like obviously sometimes when people have like a tool or a product, there's like, oh, you got to use this, like this is the best, you know, and like I like
Mm,
that you have this level-headed approach about it, and it's still a great tool. And I I think especially for like existing applications that were built with the like the original like the early days Redux, the fact that they have
mhm,
such a great experience now with the modern stuff with RTK and like
mhm,
even with the querying and stuff, because like obviously like something like React Query or use SWR, they're really great projects, but like you might not be able to retrofit that into your existing Redux, you know, like
mhm.
because it could conflict potentially. So it's nice that that comes in there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like our goal as maintainers has never been to tell people they should or must use Redux. Like I said, most of
yeah.
our time has been spent saying when you shouldn't. Our goal is just to make it the best version of itself it can be, so that
Hmm.
if people choose to use Redux, it works well for them. Um,
Yeah.
there's even case we actually have like we're actually pretty good friends with the React query maintainers, TK
Okay.
Dodo,
The
Dominic
Tanner.
Dorfmeister,
Okay.
and Tanner, and we actually cross recommend each other's libraries. So
Okay.
our joint advice is if you're using Redux in a React app, you should be using
Hmm.
RTK query to manage the data fetching. If you're
Okay.
not using Redux in your React app, you should be using React query to use the data fetching.
Okay.
Now, with that, there is actually a small caveat that like you can actually use RTK query to
Hmm.
do the data fetching, even if you're not using Redux for any client side state management in the app. Like you can either set up the Redux store and have the data fetching piece be the only thing that it does. Or technically, we actually have a little wrapper that'll manage setting up the Redux store for you in that case. But there are people who like RTK queries API design and have
Okay.
opted to use that over React query because they feel it actually works better for them. One
Okay.
example of that would be we designed RTK query to be very friendly for code generation. Like
Okay.
with React query, you're supposed to like pass in the async function to the query hook every time.
Hmm.
Whereas with RTK query, you actually define your data fetching endpoint definitions up front, and then
Okay.
it generates specific hooks from those. And it
Oh,
was
okay.
designed that way so that you could actually code generate those API endpoint definitions.
Okay.
They exist once centrally, and then you get all the usage on the client from that. So
Okay.
I've seen people say like, we have a giant open API schema for our back end, and
Hmm.
we just code gen all the RTK query stuff for the client side, and it
Okay. Yeah.
all just shows up and works. So like even there are cases where you might choose to use Redux, even if it's just the RTK query piece,
Oh,
because it
okay.
fits better in an architectural way for your app.
Okay. I didn't realize you can use it like as kind of standalone-ish. Okay,
Mhm.
that's cool.
Yep.
Okay. Nice. Nice. Um, what was I gonna ask you? It was related to what you were just talking about, but I definitely want to talk about open source, and I definitely want to dig into replay as well. And like you
Mhm.
said, I'm cool with going over time. It's all good. Um,
I got
the
plenty of time.
I'm curious about like I've been working in open source since about 2015, or not working. I've been contributing to open source in 2015, but I've been working professionally since 2020 when I started working at Dev2. And we talked about this briefly before the stream, but I definitely want to dig into a lot of this. Is it's kind of like, you know, I always remind people that like there's always people behind projects. It's like when people
Mhm.
get on the internet, it's like they forget there's humans sometimes, you know?
Oh yeah.
And I'm
Oh yeah.
you know, and it's just like like the internet, like what people see on the internet about you is like a fraction of what you are, you know? And like I remember somebody saying like, is this when's this going to get merged? And I was like on vacation. So when I got back, I responded and saying, "Oh, hey, thanks for the PR. I was on vacation, you know, like I'm taking a
Mm.
peek at it now, you know?" And like I think y- I don't think I've never gotten burnt out in open source because I've typically been working on applications or like Netlify I got a little burnt out, to be honest. Great people, but the stuff I was working on it kind of wore me down a bit.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, like, have you burned out on open source, and like how did you deal with that? And because this is a common question that a lot of people
Mhm.
bring up.
I came very okay. So first off, Redux has always been a side project for me. I've always had a day job that was, building actual applications. That's what paid the
Yeah,
bills. And so like all my Redux stuff has been not necessarily outside work hours, but outside the
yeah,
day job in terms of responsibilities. Um,
yeah, totally.
I came very close to burning out in spring 2018. I had
Hmm.
signed myself like my biggest problem is all this stuff is self-imposed responsibilities. No one is
Yeah.
sitting here and forcing me to maintain Redux. No one is forcing me to go through issues. No one is forcing me to respond to questions or write docs or go on podcasts or anything else. These are things that I
Hmm.
choose to do. The problem is I have made it my responsibility to do these things.
Yeah.
And I have had times where I assigned myself entirely too many responsibilities. And the spring of 2018 was the worst of that. I was doing a bunch of actual Redux maintainer work.
Okay.
I had signed up to do a workshop. I decided to start an email newsletter because everyone was doing email newsletters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I was trying to maintain a list of useful and relevant articles about React and Redux. And
Yeah.
just keeping up with the articles list was taking up like 10 to 12 hours every weekend. And the
Hmm.
list kept growing, not shrinking. Like the
Yeah.
number of articles that I needed to go through. And it was entirely too much. And the problem was I'd always figured that burnout is something that happens to other people, not to
Hmm.
me. And then I finally had some free time around June of 2018, and I
Okay.
realized, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right.
Hmm.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. And I realized I was actually kind of like halfway down that slope to burnout.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had to make some very intentional decisions about cutting out a lot of the stuff that I'd been doing,
Hmm.
allowing myself to even have evenings where I sit on the couch and I goof off and randomly browse the internet and not feel guilty about not being productive. Um,
Yeah.
and I had to make those changes in order to still do the real maintainer work that I still wanted to do.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
it's it's almost definitely true that I still do too much. I've tried to keep it a better balance over the last few years. Um, this last year was also kind of tough. I spent the entire year working on the a lot of stuff around Redux Toolkit 2.0,
Yeah.
including the ESM Common JS modernization, which was
Oh
its
yeah. That's
own
what I was gonna ask
nightmare.
you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I that that be- I knew it was going to be stupid and complicated. It turned out to be far more stupid and complicated than I ever thought it was going to be. I actually wrote a blog post back in August talking about all the pain and suffering that I'd gone through to try to make this stuff work. Um,
Yeah.
by early November, I could see the finish line for Redux Toolkit 2.0. And actually, part of the issue was all of the Redux packages needed these same updates. So
Okay.
Redux Toolkit, Redux Core, React Redux, Reselect, Redux Thunk, they all needed the same module packaging updates. and we were doing a bunch of other build tooling and publishing changes, and we had some TypeScript changes and some new features. Um,
Okay.
the only way we were able to ship the stuff last year was because I made the project manager decision that we were
Okay.
going to defer any changes around RTK query until after 2.0 was done. So in fact,
Okay.
that's actually like my big goal for this year is to actually work on RTK query features. But by early November, like after working on this stuff for 10 to 11 months, I could
Mhm.
now see the finish line in sight. We had a relatively finite list of, 10 to 15 outstanding tasks on GitHub that were tagged
Okay.
with 2.0. And so I intentionally spent more time in November trying to chew through those.
Okay.
And then the problem was I had a big trip coming up at the start of December, and I really, really wanted to get this stuff out the door
Okay.
before that trip happened. So like I want to be able to enjoy the trip, enjoy the holidays without this stuff hanging over me. I just want it
Yeah, I feel that.
done. And so I actually put in like an entire extra like 35 hours between like starting from Thanksgiving weekend until like December 3rd. I
Mhm.
I don't normally crunch like that. Like I maintain like a nice simple like 8 hour like real day job work day. I have evenings. I play a ton of golf when the weather's good.
Okay.
But I did very intentionally crunch myself for a week
Yeah.
to get that out the door. So like I had to push myself quite a bit for that. And
Mhm.
then, the trip and the holidays and a bunch of other stuff going on outside work ended up being very chaotic. But the last couple weeks, I've been able to sit down and relax and reestablish myself. And actually, even just like in the last day or two, I'm like, okay, I feel more rested. I feel more
Yeah.
recovered. Let me actually start thinking about like the next maintainer tasks that I
Mhm.
want to try to take on.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah. I feel that too. Like, I try not to. It's a weird space working in open source because like I feel like you would probably agree, but like as soon as I started contributing to open source, my career trajectory has changed completely, like for the
Mhm.
positive. But you know, there's months, there's some things like I remember. I don't know if you've ever used Refine GitHub. It's from
Mhm. Yep.
Cinderus. Yeah,
Love that.
yeah. So I was a big fan of it, and at one point he's like, he had this issue open, migrate to TypeScript. So I migrated that whole project to TypeScript,
Mm.
and it was like over 2 months, and I was
I
just
feel that.
like, I was just like, because we did it incrementally. We did like first off, we were just like, let's convert it to TypeScript, but we won't do strict right away
Mhm.
because it just like too many things to patch up right away. And then then there was a second wave of okay, let's tighten it up now and like make it strict and stuff. But it was like to your point about like nobody's forcing you to do this. I was like I wanted to do this, and I even though it took a long time, like I was like I wanted to see this through. I one because I was enjoying it doing it, and also I know it would help others. And who knows, maybe like because stuff's open source too. People can see like the progression of something, or like just dig into the code. Oh, why'd they do that? So like, but there's definitely been cases like that. But I've aside from that, like I don't think there's been anything that I really spent like super long on. Like, I mean, definitely feature work. Like when I'm working at Dev2 or Netlify or open source now, I like we definitely have features I got to ship and stuff. But it didn't feel like that so much. But it was like just getting back to your point. It's like a weird feeling like you have this sense of I need to do this, but
Mhm.
nobody's saying like you have to do it. And it's a weird feeling, and I don't think it's a bad feeling, but it's like I can definitely say like just anything I've done in open source, it's just skyrocketed my career for me. Like it's opened up doors, opportunities. Um, but there's other things that come with it too, and like we were talking about this briefly the before the stream. Like I've typically worked on open source applications like Dev2 or like open source now, but you've been the maintainer of a wildly popular
Mhm.
library. So it's not like the app's one thing. There's only one app, like people are, I don't know how many downloads a week Redux has, but I think it's probably in
Hmm.
the millions. So
Well, so I for the month, I was looking at this recently for I think the month of October. If you add up all the downloads for Redux Core, React Redux, Redux Toolkit, and Reselect, it was
yeah,
about 130 million combined downloads.
wow, wow,
And then I shipped major versions of all of those in December. And
yeah,
so like it is an actual source of pride. Like my code is used by millions of developers, and the people who use those apps are in
hmm
the hundreds of like maybe even billions of people have used my code.
yeah.
And
It's
it's
a
it's
cool feeling.
incredibly it's incredibly inspiring. It's very humbling. It also means like I have to take this stuff seriously. Like
Yeah,
when I hit that publish button, it's not just a casual, oh yeah, like here, like five people like like if I screw this up, like it's not to the level of people are gonna die, but
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's a big deal. There was
yeah.
one time I accidentally shipped a stray console log in a
Okay.
hot path in React Redux in a bug fix release. Took
Oof.
about 5 minutes for someone to report that.
Yeah, it's like I have
um,
20,000 console logs in my dev tools.
pretty much, yeah. But like I had to put a lot of time and effort into making sure that all the pieces were ready for us to ship these major versions
Mhm.
because like I it's not that I'm incapable of slacking off. Trust me, like people have no idea how much I slack off around the house. Like people like you were saying earlier, like we people only see like a part of ourselves online.
Yeah.
People don't see how much I slack off. They don't see how much I procrastinate. They only see like the final output of my
Okay.
blog posts or my releases. Like I slack off so much. People have no idea. But at the same time, like I take life seriously enough that it's really not possible for me to knowingly do a bad job at things.
Mhm.
Like I absolutely make mistakes, trust me. But like
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not capable of intentionally doing a thing poorly. And so this goes back to the self-responsibility thing. Like because I
Yeah.
have taken on the role of maintainer, I am now forced by my own personality to do it to the best of my ability. And
Mhm.
so that means putting in the time and effort to do these releases the right way and
Yeah.
try to do the testing and the documentation and make sure that all the pieces are in place because that is my standard of I've chosen to do this role.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I feel that like I always want to do a good job at what I'm doing, and like and this like we'll definitely I definitely want to talk about replay, but this is
Yeah, we
like
can switch over to that here in a second.
yeah, yeah, no, like, because honestly, I could talk to you about open source all
Mm,
day for sure. But yeah, like, I'm curious about like, well, for the release flow testing and stuff in the Redux libraries or org. Like, what do you have in place? Like, there's a lot of things
mm,
like we have in place. We have like compliance, so like we use conventional commit, so you can't actually merge a PR if it doesn't have like feat or fix
mm,
or chore, etc. Uh, which sounds like a minor thing, but it helps with the change log, which we use later. There's like obviously the standard stuff like linting and prettier, you applying that,
mm,
testing and so on. Um, I'm curious if you have any other kind of like automations in the flow, or like what's kind of like the typical flow of if somebody's gonna commit a PR or open up an issue in the
mm.
Redux org.
Yeah. So first off, to answer your earlier question, at this point, all of our library code bases are TypeScript.
Okay.
We converted React Redux to TypeScript for version 8, which shipped a couple of years ago. We had actually converted the Redux core to TypeScript in 2019 and then never shipped it.
Okay.
We were concerned about compatibility issues at the time, and so we
Hmm.
finally shipped that TypeScript conversion as version 5 back in December. Um,
Okay.
so everything's written in TypeScript. We have both unit tests and type level tests that verify the
Okay.
types do what they're supposed to do. Um, I've never been a fan of the conventional commit standard myself. It's just never clicked for me. So like
Yeah.
I actually end up writing all our change logs kind of by hand. A
Okay.
combination of like looking at the list of PRs that were merged since the last release, and then going through and actually figuring out like here's what's worth describing. Here's what
Mhm.
people will care about in relation to this change. So I've had lots and lots of practice writing change logs over the years.
Okay.
Um, One new thing we added to CI during this last year, I mentioned I spent a lot of the year fighting with modernizing our package definitions for better ESM Common JS,
Yeah.
setup. And what I quickly found was, okay, it's so complex. I could rant about this topic for hours. I won't do that. But like the real problem is there are so many different build tools out there and so many different environments, and there's small nuances and issues with each of these different tools.
Mhm.
So after my first attempt to update some of the packages ran into these compatibility problems, I ended up creating a suite of example apps with Create React App 4, Create React App 5, Vite,
Okay.
Next.js, a couple different node examples. And I was running those in CI for all of our different packages just to verify that the packaging and publishing setup
Okay.
would build and run correctly in each of those different tooling environments. Now, ironically, I never got around to adding a React Native example to that
Okay.
suite. And because I'm not a React Native developer,
Yeah.
and I wanted us to add one. I didn't have time, and then I kind of forgot about it. Sure enough, I hit the buttons to publish these on December 4th. Literally, as I'm driving to the airport, one of the other okay, one of the truisms about publishing a library is it doesn't matter how many pre-release alphas and betas and release candidates you put out. You will
Yeah.
only get real bug reports after you publish the final version because now more
Yeah.
people are using it in more environments. Sure enough, I'm literally driving to the airport. One of the other maintainers DMs me with an issue that someone just filed saying React Redux version 9 will not load with React Native.
Yeah.
Or I guess technically it was possibly just with Expo.
Okay.
But so I got to the airport, got to the gate, pulled out my laptop, reproduced the problem, flew to Chicago, got to the gate, pulled out my laptop, put up a PR with a possible fix, got in line because we were about to board. Then boarding was delayed, pulled out my laptop, updated the fix, boarded the plane, pulled out the laptop, published the fix. And like on the one hand, I brought this on myself. Like this is what you're asking for when you publish a major version right before going to the airport.
Yeah.
But it does show that like having these tests matters. And if I'd actually
Mhm.
had the React Native example ahead of time, I probably would have caught this. So
Yeah.
we've actually got someone else named Arya has actually got a couple PRs up to try to add a couple React Native examples. I can't remember if I've merged them or not, and I'm going to
Okay.
have to go double check. But
Okay.
like trying to cover those bases as much as possible.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess like we can kind of wrap it up here before we move on
Mm,
to replay. But I would definitely love to. I got to speak to my coworker Becca. She runs our Twitter Spaces for open source. If you're ever down to talk in open source, like we'd love to have you on. But
sure.
uh, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I guess like when those example packages, so those examples that you were using to run the tests on, I guess some of them were like, this is just common JS. This is one like type module in the
Mhm,
package JSON, making sure it builds and run. Like that's the kind of
mhm.
differences. Okay.
Or well, for example, Webpack 4 does not support the exports field in
Okay.
package.json. It's still looking for the main or module fields.
Okay.
So, and Create React App 4 still uses Webpack 4, as do, some other setups. So, in order to properly support Webpack 4, I still had to have those older fields in package.json. But
Okay.
Webpack 4's parser also does not support parsing object spreads or optional chaining. So
Oh, really?
even
Okay.
though I was trying to get away from doing any transpiling of JavaScript syntax. Like I wanted to ship only modern syntax.
Yeah.
I ended up having to create a secondary build artifact in the package just to support Webpack 4. So the
Okay.
primary one is ESM syntax, totally modern JavaScript. We don't change any of the JavaScript syntax, just the TypeScript types. But I
Okay.
had to have another artifact that is Webpack 4 that is, compiled to ES 2017 that also has a .js extension instead of .mjs,
Okay.
because there's still enough people out there possibly using Webpack 4 that I want my stuff to just work with their
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah, totally. Okay. No, that's cool. That's cool. And now I can finally do a segue to head over to replay, I think.
Mhm,
But I'm loving this conversation though. Seriously, I could talk about it forever. Um,
mhm.
so you have all this experience with Redux. There's time travel debugging. I know you also have another coworker, Brian Vaughn, who used to be on the React
Yep.
core team, who worked on the React dev tools. I'm not sure if they
Mhm.
still contribute to those tools, but it's kind of like it was a perfect storm for you to go work at Replay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So I started looking for a new position at the start of 22. And I
Yeah.
had an idea of like the kind of a team that I wanted to be on, but not necessarily the kind of a project per se. And
Okay.
Replay has ended up being the absolute perfect fit in like every way possible. The
Okay.
kind of a team, the actual people that I work with, the the reason, like the kind of thing that we're building and what it's meant to do, and then
Hmm.
the actual technical aspects of the features and the problems that I'm getting to solve.
Okay.
So, if you wanna bring up the screen for a minute.
Yeah,
So
sure.
the idea of replay is that, when you are debugging, you like one of the first things you have to do is be able to reproduce the problem. And this is
Yeah.
so that you know that, like, yeah, the bug actually exists. Like if I've got an issue report, I need to confirm that this is a real bug. But then you,
Yeah.
you keep having to run through the reproduction steps over and over and over as you're trying to debug. Like
Hmm.
if you're using console logs and print statements, then you add a few print statements, you hit save, you reload the page, click, boom. Whoops, I need 3 more console logs because I need more data. Add the logs, refresh the page, repeat.
Hmm.
If you're using a graphical debugger, then you're setting breakpoints and you're stepping in and you're stepping out and steps. Whoops, I just stepped one line too far. And
Yeah.
now I have to restart the whole process and get back to the point of where I was. Or you've got the issue that occurs on someone else's machine, maybe only on Macs in Japan on Tuesdays in February, and it works just fine on my machine.
Yeah.
But or even like it happens in someone else's application, but it only happens in the real app, and they really can't reduce it to like a minimal code sandbox example. So
Yeah.
the idea of replay is that if you can record the bug happening once,
Hmm.
now we've got this DVR like recording that anyone can go in and investigate exactly what happened on that machine as it happened there. And you can jump to any point in time and investigate and see the exact behavior of the code as it
Okay.
ran. This doesn't magically fix the bug for you, but it sure makes that a whole lot easier to actually investigate.
Yeah. And it's
So, mhm,
before you go on there, I was listening. Oh, that's cool, hoverboard.
yep,
There's one thing I didn't realize about this project. I was listening to, I can't remember if it was JS
Jason
Party
probably.
or yeah, it was Jason, the founder or co-founder.
Mhm, yep,
He used to work on. I know he used to work on the Firefox debug tools.
yep,
Um, I didn't realize that Replay itself is actually a fork of Chromium, and
yes.
that kind of blew my mind. But I think it kind of makes sense.
Mhm.
But anyways, I'll let you keep going on here. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wanted to
So,
throw that
like,
out there.
I can actually hit just a little bit on how it works. So, like, people often ask us, like, how are you different from like a log rocket or a sentry or something? And log rocket is a session monitoring tool, and it has JavaScript that runs in the actual user's page in production.
Hmm.
It can capture, DOM changes and network requests and where the mouse clicks were. That's really useful. We actually use LogRocket in our own UI, but that is limited because it's running inside the browser in the page.
Okay, yeah.
And so with replay, we are actually capturing the browser talking to the operating system. Every time it opens up a network socket, receives a JavaScript packet, has a click, whatever, we are capturing that level of detail. The best analogy I can give is, like, let's say you're writing a tic-tac-toe game and you're
Yeah.
using a random number generator to decide the moves. If you seed the random number generator so it always spits out the same random numbers every time, you can
Hmm.
predict exactly what moves will happen.
Yeah.
Replay is the same thing times a million. We capture
Okay.
all the inputs to the browser. It's the same browser rerunning the same inputs. It's going to run your entire program the exact same way.
Okay.
So when you open up a replay to debug it, we actually spin up a copy of your same browser in the cloud,
Okay.
feed it the same data, capture snapshots like every second or two along the way.
Hmm.
And as you jump back and forth to different points in time, we make more copies of that browser and
Okay.
pause them at that instant. And
Okay.
so this allows us to actually inspect the code, which is
Hmm.
what these session monitoring and in-page tools can't do. So replay is very focused on the debugging use case.
Okay. Yeah, and I can see that being super super valuable. A question I had, and this is something like just getting back to Redux briefly, like there was always the time travel debugging that was
Mhm,
mentioned in Redux, and the thing that like would often come up, at least when I would speak to people, is like, yes, you can kind of retrace your steps by like replaying things, but like if there's side effects, like
mhm.
database, updates and
Yep,
stuff, that stuff, like you can't rewind that because obviously that part of the stack is just like it's been done. So like I
exactly. Yeah.
imagine it's kind of similar like in this case.
Well, that's actually the thing. So you're right. Like the thing about React and Redux has always been that your UI is a reflection of the state at this point in time. So yeah, like with
Hmm.
Redux's dev tools, you could say, let's go backwards to a certain action, or let me pretend that a certain action never got dispatched and see
Yeah.
how it looks, or even like edit the reducer logic and hot reload it and then rerun the actions. But that did not account for the side effects. So if you've
Okay.
got, sagas or observables or thunks or something like that, that stuff isn't going to get affected. With
Hmm.
replay, we are truly capturing literally everything that happened in the
Okay.
browser. So like it does not matter what framework you're using. If it's JavaScript code that ran in the browser, we can capture and replay all of that. Because strictly
Okay.
speaking, we're not even capturing the code itself or like what happened. Like we're capturing the fact that these inputs went in so that
Yeah.
when we replay it, the same stuff happens.
Okay, gotcha. And like it's so like because you control the browser because you've literally forked a browser,
Mm,
that for example, side effects like I was talking about, like say you updated the database, that part is kind of abstracted away, I guess, because like you have the network request, so you know what happened. It doesn't
right.
matter that the database got updated.
Mhm.
It's just that okay, I'm because I imagine you have access to all that. It's not just like okay, the UI changed and like I'm debugging through code. Like it's the whole stack of everything, right?
Yeah, we're not capturing what happened in a database on the other end, but we
Yeah,
did capture that a request went out and a response came back. And during
yeah.
the replaying process, the same code is going to handle that response the same way.
Okay, yeah. So that's nice. So that takes the database out of the equation, which was
Mhm.
kind of I was alluding to. Oh, just gonna say bye in the chat there. Thanks for hanging, Liz. Um, yeah. Okay, that's really nice because you have the network request that sends the request and you get the payload. Then you don't even care what the back end is really
Mhm.
to for the most part.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool.
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and run through a real quick demo. So I've got a replay here that is actually of the example app I built for one of the Redux tutorials. It's a to-do app. In this recording, I had a playwright script that just went through and, clicked some of the to-dos, turned them on and off, deleted a couple things. So, just an
Okay.
example of typical interactions in a React and Redux application. So when I first open this up, what you see here is you've got the video preview.
Okay.
And if I click the play button, it goes by real fast. But we can see the video timeline, and I can jump to different points, and it shows the UI as it looked at that point
Okay.
in the recording. And this is useful. But like I said,
Mhm.
other tools like a log rocket can show you the state of the page at a
Yeah.
point in time in a user session. That part is not the really interesting part. But if I click on this DevTools tab up here,
Mhm.
now we have something that looks like the Firefox DevTools as an application, which our code base actually started as a literal copy paste of the entire
Okay.
Firefox DevTools code base. We've
Okay.
we've actually rewritten almost literally every single line of code since then, but that's where we got the start.
Okay, and a
So,
quick question about the
mhm,
dev tool. So, because like the Firefox, like I did some development in Firefox when it was like Mozilla, like they had
mhm,
Zool and all that stuff, and it was all
yep.
JavaScript. I'm assuming the debugger tools in Firefox were all written in JavaScript and UI, like it wasn't like C++
Yep.
or something.
Yeah, yeah, and
Or
in fact, if you even today, the Firefox DevTools code base is still a React and Redux application. The problem
oh, okay,
is that it is primarily a 2016 era React and Redux application,
okay, okay,
which was actually a part of the problem when I came on board.
okay,
When I joined in March of 22, we had about 140,000 lines in our own front end code base. 20,000 of that was new code that was replay specific, like our recording library page or some of the time travel UI functionality. That was
okay,
relatively modern React and Redux and TypeScript. But there was 120,000 lines of like plain JavaScript, React Redux Connect, and handwritten reducers, plus a lot of like really weird Firefox specific patterns. So it
okay,
actually took us over a year to get most of that modernized, get the whole code base converted to TypeScript. We deleted probably like 40,000 lines of dead code that Firefox needed that Replay didn't. And
okay,
we've rewritten, like I said, almost all these UI pieces from scratch at this point.
okay.
Most of that
Pretty
has been done by my teammate Brian Vaughn.
okay. Pretty nice that you have React Redux toolkit now
Mhm.
to do
Yep.
that upgrade. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
All right. So let's say that there's a bug somewhere in this recording. There isn't actually a bug in this recording, but for sake of the explanation. So
Hmm.
I, as a developer, trying to investigate the bug, like I might know that okay, I followed a series of steps, I clicked a button, something broke, and because this particular example is a Redux app,
Yeah.
maybe one of the first places I want to look is the reducer logic.
Okay.
Now, let me even zoom this in a little bit here. So like any other debugger, I can open up the source code. We use source maps to show the original files. And
Okay.
so I've got the to-do slice file over here. And one of the first things you'll notice is that not only do we have the source code and the line numbers, but
Hmm.
over here on the left side, we have an additional set of numbers.
Yeah.
And these are actually hit counts. These tell you
Oh. Okay.
how many how many times each line of code got executed over the course of the recording. And that starts to tell you something useful. Like maybe I expected this line of code to get hit 5 times and it actually got hit
Hmm.
100. That's not right. Or I
Yeah.
expected to go inside the if statement, but it didn't. So like just having that sort of information starts to tell you something useful about what your app was doing.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of people argue back and forth about like, should I use print debugging or graphical debuggers with breakpoints? And I've always said
Yeah.
that like both of these are very valuable tools to have in your toolbox. One of the great things about replay is you can use both of these interchangeably. So
Okay.
we've made this recording. There aren't console logs related to whatever it is I'm trying to debug.
Hmm.
But if I hover over this line, there's a plus sign here. And if I hit
Okay.
the plus sign, we can see that the line of code got hit twice. And now there's two different messages showing up in the console. And by default, it's just like the name of the file or the function and the line number. That's
Okay.
not all that interesting. This is a reducer. I probably care about like the values that were in the action object
Yeah.
or the state. Now, because this is Redux Toolkit and Immer, the proxies don't get logged very well. That's just browsers don't show them in good detail. But I can
Okay.
log the current state, and I can log, say, like action.payload. Let's even throw in like action.type here.
Okay.
So you notice that each of these has logged something different. And that's because we're evaluating the expressions every time the line of code ran. So
Okay.
it got hit twice. This is the actual values at that point in time. And just like any other debugger, we can expand these and inspect them and see what's going on.
Okay.
We can even dig inside the proxy. This is hard to read. This is like Immer's internal data structures. We don't really care about that.
Okay. Gotcha.
So now I'm seeing what the values were, but maybe I want to do some deeper investigation to one of these hits. And so if I
Mhm.
mouse over this message, we've got this rewind button here. And if I
Okay.
click that, now I'm paused at that line of code, and I can
Okay.
hover over the variables and I can inspect them. And we've got your typical step debugging commands. So I can step in, step out, step over. I can even step backwards.
Okay.
I've got the call stack and the variables that are in scope. So you can go back and forth between the print debugging and the step debugging, but you can do it at any point in time, any line of code in the entire recording.
Okay. Okay.
Now, on top of that, maybe I found something interesting here. Like maybe one of the values looks wrong. So I can actually add a comment and I can say that, color seems off here somehow. Like again, like pretending that we've got a bug in this example.
Okay.
And I've added a comment, and I'm actually just going to jump to some other point in time in the recording. If I share this comment link with someone else, another developer on my team, or like I can come in here, and when I click on this comment, it's
Yeah.
actually going to take me. It's not just going to open the line of code. It's going to jump to the point in time I was paused at when I
Oh,
made that
okay.
comment. And so now whoever else is looking at this recording is seeing the exact same piece of the code at the same point in time. So it makes it
That's
really,
super
really,
valuable.
yeah, really, really powerful. Like if I'm diving through the code to see what's going on, I can leave like the trail of knowledge that I'm learning as I
Mhm.
debug this, and someone else can come in here and look at the same stuff. So
Yeah.
we've also got the ability to see the entire HTML DOM tree at the point in time that you're paused at. We've got the ability to see the React component tree at the point in time that you're paused at.
Okay.
And of course, it's having issues during the demo.
That's okay. That's just classic demo
Inevitably,
stuff.
inevitably,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. We
But
do
it's
have
cool.
we do have the Redux dev tools as well, so you can see the action, the state, the change in the state, and then as you mentioned, we've got the network tab, and we can see all the different requests and responses that went out.
Okay. I have
So
a question about the
mhm,
network tab. So like say you've determined, okay, I've got a bug here, like I added the to do but it updated incorrectly. Let's assume the to dos are going to a database. A
mhm.
network request was made. I'm like, okay, it's we figured out, okay, we're at this point, we're sending the wrong thing over the network. Can we alter the payloads of the
Mhm.
network request to see it working? Is that possible?
Can we change time?
Yes.
Sadly, the answer currently is no. We
Okay.
would love it. It's actually the kind of thing that people immediately ask us. Um,
Okay.
Ultimately, what it goes down to is this is that low level data of the browser talking to the operating system that we've recorded.
Mhm.
Hypothetically, it's probably technically possible that someday we could figure out a way to allow changes to the recorded data somehow.
Okay.
Um, and at that point, you feed in a slightly different input to the recorded
Mhm.
program. At this
Yeah.
point in time, that's not possible. But
Okay.
like that's the question everyone has. Like, can I change my code, rebuild it, and then like rerun the program with different like the fixed program with the same inputs?
Yeah.
Maybe a few years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was just because I was just thinking of something like mock service worker where you could
Mhm.
intercept the request, but like maybe that doesn't make sense in the context of because this is literally a fork of the browser, but of a browser. But I think the thing that is super valuable, what you mentioned about like when you can go to that specific point in time with the current state and you have a comment saying like here's where it blows up or whatever, the the amount of time saved by just doing that, because typically what
Mhm.
I've had to do in the past is I'll say like, okay, I get this crash, here's the step. So click here, here, here. And then when you get to this point, like put a breakpoint on
Mhm.
line, whatever,
Yep.
you're gonna see that it's wrong. And like all that setup just to say, and this is when it happens, is completely gone by just saying
Mhm.
a comment
Exactly.
here.
Yeah.
That's massive.
So yeah. So similarly, like if we've got the recording, like if one person does some initial triage, someone else can pick up where they left off. Or you've
Yeah.
got like for the open source context, like I've lost track of the number of times I've said over the years, please provide a code sandbox or a GitHub repo that
Yeah, yeah,
demonstrates
yeah.
this bug actually happening. And if someone can actually provide a replay, I don't have to
Mhm.
worry about cloning their repo, installing their dependencies, figuring out the right steps to make this happen. I see it
Okay.
exactly as it happened on their system, and that could actually make it easier. Like we've also had the cases where someone's like, I can't share this. This is proprietary company code.
Yeah.
If they are okay with making a replay recording, the recordings are private by default. And you can
Oh,
either
okay.
make them completely public or you can share them with specific people. And
Okay.
so like I've had people I'm like, okay, look, here's my replay work email address. If you can make the recording and just share it with me,
Mhm.
I can take a look and see what was happening on your system, and you're not having to leak your proprietary information publicly beyond me just taking a look at it. So
Okay.
that actually makes like the open source maintainer situation a lot easier. So,
Yeah.
like right now, there's really three primary use cases for replay. One is I'm an individual developer. There's a bug that I'm looking at. I make the recording and then I investigate it. The second
Yeah.
is you've got a QA team, or in the case
Mhm.
of an open source maintainer, external people who are reporting issues. They can make the recordings, attach them
Okay.
to the issue, and then the developer can take a look. The third use case is um, actually for end-to-end test suites. So,
Okay.
like one of the big problems with end-to-end tests is that if something goes wrong or you've got a flaky test, it is so hard to figure out why that is
Oh, yeah.
failing. Like you push a PR and something breaks, and then you're looking through 10,000 lines of GitHub Actions log output just to find the error message. And then you
Yeah.
try to run the same test in your machine, and maybe it passes, maybe it fails. I don't know. And so just getting to the point where you can investigate the failure is really, really hard.
Mhm.
And with replay, we've actually got the ability to just tweak your Playwright or Cypress config to use our recording browser to open
Oh,
up
no
to
way.
to run your end-to-end tests. And
Oh,
so you
wow.
push the PR and 100 test run, 3 tests fail. We've recorded the tests as they ran in CI.
Okay.
And now you can just open up the recording of the failed test and see what's going on. So like
Okay.
we actually have this turned on for our own front end. Like we use replay to debug replay all the time.
Okay.
So here is a recording of one of our own playwright tests that checks our ability to handle breakpoints properly.
Okay.
Um and we've actually got might take a minute to load here. So
Yeah.
we've actually got a test panel on the left side for both Playwright and Cypress. And we
Okay.
can see that there was one test in this suite. It passed. And if I click on it, we actually see all the different test steps. So for Cypress, this would be your, sci.click, sci.get. For
Okay. Yeah.
Playwright, at the moment, it's more of just the locator calls. We have a proof
Okay.
of concept that tries to organize these by like your actual test function call logic. But you can go through here. You can look at, let's see. Oh yeah, okay. We are having,
This is wild.
okay, there we go. So like I can go to the different test steps, jump to the point in time. Again, I can see the page and what it looked like at that point in time. Um, for both Cypress and Playwright, we've got some details down here. They show slightly different things. Cypress, it's
Okay.
showing some details about like what did the Cypress command, like what DOM nodes did the Cypress command collect, and which
Okay.
did it narrow down to. For Playwright, because Playwright is actually running outside the browser in Node, we can't capture all the information about the actual test execution. So we have to
Okay.
show that a little bit differently. Like we can't just show this as a normal source file. Um, we're still working on trying to improve some of that integration,
Okay.
but this makes it so much easier to look at an end-to-end test and get a sense of what happened and
Hmm.
why did it fail. Um, like
Yeah.
there, I remember one Friday afternoon a few weeks ago where like 3 of our end-to-end tests had failed or been flaky that day,
Hmm.
and it was late in the day, and of course it's Friday afternoon. I just want to knock off and call it a weekend. But I was able
Yeah.
to pretty quickly open up failed recordings for each of those tests, and like 15 minutes each say, oh, test 1 failed because we actually broke here. Test 2 failed because we got a bad network request over here. And test 3, I think our test actually needs a little bit of tweaking. I didn't fix them right there, but I left the notes. I made the comments, and
Okay.
Brian was able to come in on Monday and actually pick up and just knock out the fixes real fast.
Okay.
And it's like it took me 45 minutes just to look through and triage those.
Yeah.
Without replay, it probably would have taken me at least a couple hours just to figure out why the first one was having issues. So
Yeah.
this can save you so much time trying to nail down what's going on.
Oh yeah, I totally feel this because you run the end-to-end test locally because your machine's faster. So sometimes things don't happen that happen in CI. And then like typically what I've done is okay, I'll look at the logs. Sometime you can like Cypress, I haven't used Playwright so much, but you can record something in the cloud. Sometimes it's hard. Well, it
Mhm.
depends. If you're using the Cypress like recorder, like their cloud offering, that's one thing. But if you're not using that, and then you have to like write it to somewhere on in your CI server, and then you have to be able to pull it down, and then you look at that, and then or you look at whatever the logs are. But it's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Like, okay, let's
Mhm.
try this now because it's not
Mhm.
happening locally.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
yeah.
here's an example. So strictly this test actually passed, but one of our network requests actually did fail somewhere in the process. And so,
Okay.
we have a standard console error message here. I just hit the jump button and I'm now paused right there. Uh,
Yeah.
one other feature I wanted to show off real fast. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
let's say you're working with a code base that maybe you're not all that familiar with,
Hmm.
and like I know that when I click this button, that's what makes it break. But I don't even know what component handles that. I don't know like what
Yeah.
happened after I did the click. So I actually built a feature last year that we called jump to code.
Okay.
So over here, and this works in both tests and non-tests. Any place that there was a click or a key press, you can
Hmm.
hover over that, and you see this button here, jump to code. And I don't even know where
Yeah.
this is going to take me, but I'm going to click it. Okay, that actually makes sense. This was a click on one of the stepping commands in our own
Okay.
debugger. And So it's taken me to the command bar component, which has the step in, step out, step over buttons. And I am now paused in this click handler at the time that it ran.
With its current
And this,
state at
yeah,
that time.
and this gives me a starting point to be able to investigate what actually happened when there was
Okay.
that click or the key press. And so, like, this gives you a literal way to jump into the code and start to investigate something, even if you're not familiar with how did I get there to begin with.
Yeah.
And if I can brag for a minute,
Yeah, go for it. Brag away.
Replay's entire capability is actually exposed via a backend API, and that
Okay.
API is even publicly documented. Let me pull up the link here. So what we've built so far is, just a debugger. Now it's a time
Yeah.
travel powered debugger, but it looks and feels like a standard debugger.
Mhm.
All the capabilities of our time travel backend are exposed over this API. And so you
Okay.
can open up a recording, you can tell it pause at a certain time, you can ask for a list of the source files, you can get their contents, ask what variables
Okay.
are in scope. And we are barely scratching the surface of what you can do when you have an entire time travel powered API at your
Mhm.
fingertips. So this is actually how we've built some of the features in
Okay.
Replay. Like our React DevTools integration actually relies on the time travel aspects of that API. So we
Okay.
actually capture during the recording process, here's every time that React rendered, and that's it. And then we have a
Mhm.
post-processing step on our server that goes in, finds those timestamps, injects the React DevTools JavaScript code into the paused browser, and
Okay.
retrieves the details on what components existed at that point in time.
Okay. That's
Similarly,
wild.
the jump to code feature, when React renders a DOM node in the page,
Mhm.
it actually attaches a copy of the props object to the DOM node. And when there's
Yeah.
a JavaScript event, the DOM node's there as event.target. And so I wrote some code that does the time travel inspection, goes to event.target, looks at the DOM node. And if there's a click event, I'm probably looking for a props.onClick function, right?
Yeah.
So I find that function. I confirm that it got run right after the click event. And then I now know the line of code and the timestamp. And
That's
so
awesome.
we can start to use that time travel API to build features that you literally could not do with any other tool.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing because when you were talking about when you're new to a code base, the way I typically approach a new code base, because typically, I mean, I've done full stack or more front end leaning, but it's like, okay, click this button, like you were saying. Okay, what's the button text? Okay, I'm gonna
Mm.
search the project. Where's
Yep.
that button
Yep.
text? Or if it's translations, I'll find the key related to the localized resource, whatever. I'll find that, and then I'll be like, okay, and then kind of just basically start digging from there, and
Mhm.
basically finding pieces on the UI that might relate to it, because I have no idea what the page is. I remember when I was at Autodesk, like I was saying, it was a Rails app, which I'm not a Rails dev, so I'm like, where the
Mhm.
heck is everything? And it's just all that kind of search, copy paste, search and find, and
Been there,
this
done
to
that.
me is blowing my mind, because I'm just yeah, exactly, so this is this gets back to the whole point of not whole point, but the amount of time you're saving, because you know I know I can find things the way I was mentioning, or maybe there's I might use a bit of AI too now, but this is so much faster because it's
Mhm.
boom, I know where you are, and not only is it this is where it's happening, this is the state,
Mhm.
that's huge. So
Yeah,
this is
I'm
blowing my
paused at
mind.
this point in time, and it was paused this piece of data and this piece of data, and it was this command this is exactly what it was.
Yeah. No, this is like I'm kind of blown away. I still have to try out Replay. I've heard about it a bit, and like I said, I was listening to that podcast episode with the founder Jason there, but just seeing this in action, I'm just like it's and
It's fun
I
watching people like realize it for the first time.
yeah. Now the like obviously it's built with like an actual browser, and then you have the
Mhm.
tools for like React and Redux. Are those like optional to enable? Because like obviously somebody who's using Replay
Mhm.
might not be using React and
Yeah.
Redux. It's just
So
those are just additions.
yeah. So at the technical level, the way it works is it starts with our forks of Firefox and Chrome. Now we're actually in the process of trying to deprecate the Firefox fork
Okay.
and transition to the Chrome fork because Chrome is what most developers use. Right
Yeah.
now, the way things stand are Firefox for Mac, Linux, and Windows is stable, but it's also deprecated. Like we're not doing
Okay.
active work on that. But also like Firefox has like a button in the toolbar that we've added that is both login and then start and stop recording. We
Hmm.
actually don't have that in the Chromium fork yet. That's
Okay.
literally a work in progress right now. It's one of the pieces we still need to add.
Okay.
Chrome for Linux is 100% stable in terms of the recording capability. And like I said, that's actually what we use for CI recordings, for
Hmm.
example. Uh, Chrome for Mac is we're working on stability for recording. It's getting there. It's not quite as stable as Linux yet. The
Okay.
browser engineers are making good progress on that. We're hoping that'll be basically fully stable within the next couple months. So
Okay.
between that and then hopefully getting that record button added to Chrome's UI, that'll make
Hmm.
it more feasible to use Chrome for the individual recording steps
Okay.
if you
Gotcha.
want to. Chrome
Yeah.
for Windows technically exists, but it's not very stable at the moment. Also, I
Okay.
happen to be the only Windows user at Replay. I actually end up
Oh,
making
no
most of
way.
my I end up making most of my recordings using Chrome for like Chrome for Linux under WSL.
Okay. Okay.
So,
That's it. Yeah, it's
we
funny. Yeah.
mhm. And then we do also actually have an alpha level fork of Node for Linux. It's not being actively worked on right now, but it actually does work well enough to record things like Jest or
Okay.
VTest tests. And I have actually made replays of those to debug even like some Redux Toolkit issues
Okay.
as well.
Oh,
So
that's
in
super cool.
general, you've got these forks. You
Hmm.
make the recording, you upload it to your account on Replay, and then you go there in any browser because this is just a normal React Redux app, and then you open this up for the debugging process.
Okay. I had a question in regards to like, so right now, well, probably for the foreseeable future, the Replay browser is a literal fork of the
Mm.
of Chromium, right? Not Chrome.
Yeah,
It's Chromium,
yeah.
right?
It's
So,
Chrome. It's Chromium plus an extra 5,000 lines of C++.
okay. I'm curious if like with the browser engineers on your team, is there any kind of collaboration with the Chromium team? Not necessarily to say like get replay features into Chromium, but like, you know, I figure like as they're building out stuff, they might come across bugs and stuff. Do they file those with like Chromium, or like is there any kind of collaboration there or
I don't think there's any active collaboration at the moment. I mean,
okay.
we really are like just like code wise an extra layer on top slash like actual changes. Like they've had to do things like when we replay the C++ hash tables in Chrome don't always
Okay.
iterate over the contents consistently. So let's rewrite all the hash tables to make sure they
Okay.
always iterate the contents in the exact same order. That
Okay,
kind of really
gotcha.
complicated stuff. Um,
Okay, okay.
also to your other question, so for the React and Redux stuff, like I
Mhm.
said, we capture everything that happens in the browser. It does not matter what framework you're using. If it's JavaScript code that ran in the browser, it gets captured and you can debug it. We
Mhm.
do have some of these specific integrations for React and Redux because those are the most widely used tools. And we
Mhm.
happen to have some experts on React and Redux working for Replay.
Yeah, yeah, I hear there's a couple
So
people on the team.
yeah. So in order to make that possible, I've actually gone in and added some code um, to our fork of Chromium, some extra
Okay.
JavaScript code that gets injected into every single page you load.
Okay.
And this actually pretends to be the React and Redux DevTools browser extensions,
Okay.
so that when the actual React app in the page runs, it thinks it's talking to the browser extension. It reports every time it rendered, and that's
Okay.
how we can actually capture the timestamps. I actually did a
Okay.
talk about this at React Advanced in London back in October, where I talked about both here's how the React DevTools browser extension works internally,
Hmm.
and then here's all the work we had to do to actually extract that information at the time travel level. And it
Okay.
starts with we have a little tiny fake version of the React DevTools extension that
Okay.
lives in the page so that we can capture the update timestamps.
Ah, that's pretty cool. So so it's basically it's not a shim per se. It's
Mhm.
the actual API, but not as feature rich as the original one, but enough to just get it into replay. Okay.
Yeah.
This is like wild. Like this sounds like a very cool project to be working on, to be
You
honest.
you can see why I'm having fun with this.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And the other thing too is like I mean, like I said, I haven't used this yet, but there's it seems like from what you've demoed at least, like this is a potential huge time saver on
Mhm.
like just fixing issues. Obviously, I know I'm saying the obvious there, but like
Yeah.
there's just so much investigation that you don't potentially have to do now just based on or you don't have to redo what somebody's already also investigated because of like the just the collaboration fact with the comment. And it's just I don't know, my mind's just kind of keeps going.
Yep.
Yeah, this is amazing. Cool. I'm gonna drop a link to replay again here. And I know we're almost at 3 p.m. here, so I'm probably gonna have to get back to
Yeah,
work
probably ought
soon.
to wrap it up. I ought to try and get some actual work done for the day.
Yeah, I got some done this morning, but I definitely have to finish some stuff. But seriously, Mark, like I feel like I could talk to you the rest of the day about all of these things, Redux, open source, replay. But yeah, I do have to get back to work as well. But this has been amazing. Thanks for everybody in the chat that joined us today. Just gonna check the schedule. Oh yeah, I've got I normally don't have 2 streams a week, but Rizal Scarlett from TBD is joining me on Wednesday. We're gonna talk about Web5 and verifiable identity. So there's that going on, and there's a bunch of others great guests coming on in the next few weeks. But just wanted to thank you again, Mark. I know you got a lot on the go, so I really do appreciate you taking the time to hang with me, and also I'm sure people tell you all the time, but just thanks so much for all your contributions to open source and the React ecosystem. It's been I've definitely benefited from your work, so salute to you, sir.
Mhm. Thanks.
And yeah, yeah, we'll see everybody else on Wednesday. Mark, if you just don't mind staying on for 1 second, and yeah,
Sure.
thanks again, everybody.
Take care.